Neris had barely set his work boots by the front door when his father pointed toward them with a cold stare. "You're 30 years old," he snapped. "If you can't bring money into this house, you're useless." His mother folded her arms without looking up from the kitchen table. "We've already found a job for you. A wealthy widow outside town needs a live-in caretaker." "I never agreed to that," Neris said. "You don't have to agree," his father answered. "You either leave tomorrow morning to work for her, or you leave this house tonight." The words landed harder than he expected. He had worked odd jobs for years, paying bills whenever he could, fixing the roof, repairing the plumbing, driving his parents wherever they needed to go. Somehow, none of it had ever been enough. "You've already spoken to her?" he asked. His mother slid a folded paper across the table. "The arrangements are finished." Finished. Without asking him. Without giving him a choice. His father leaned closer. "She lives alone, she's rich, she pays well. Stop asking questions and start earning your keep." Neris looked from one parent to the other, searching for even the smallest sign that this was temporary. Neither looked away. By sunrise, he was already driving toward a massive estate hidden miles beyond the nearest town, unaware that the house waiting for him held something his parents had spent decades making sure he would never see. The drive stretched through winding country roads until iron gates slowly opened in front of him. Beyond them stood an enormous stone manor surrounded by old oak trees and carefully kept gardens. The place felt less like a home and more like something frozen in another era. A housekeeper greeted him politely before leading him inside. "The lady of the house is waiting." The wealthy widow stood beside a tall window, elegant despite her age. The moment she turned and saw him, she stopped breathing for a second. Her eyes filled with something that looked painfully familiar, but just as quickly she composed herself. "You must be Neris," she said softly. "Yes, ma'am." She smiled, though it trembled slightly. "I'm grateful you came." Throughout the afternoon she remained kind, almost unusually attentive. While explaining his duties, she asked questions that felt oddly personal. "Did you always live with your parents? Do you remember much about being very young? Were you ever told stories about your early childhood?" Each question caught him off guard. "Not really," he admitted. "My parents never talked much about those years." Something flickered across her face before she quietly changed the subject. Later that evening, while eating dinner with the estate staff, Neris introduced himself again. The estate manager repeated his last name. For just a moment the room fell silent. One maid lowered her eyes. Another servant glanced toward the widow before pretending nothing had happened. Nobody explained the awkward pause. On his second night, long after everyone had gone to bed, he heard the widow calling weakly from upstairs. "My medicine." Neris hurried through the dim hallway, searching unfamiliar rooms, until he opened the wrong door. It was a private sitting room. A fire burned quietly in the fireplace. Books lined the walls. Family photographs covered nearly every shelf. "I'm sorry," he whispered, stepping inside only long enough to look for the medicine cabinet. Then his eyes stopped. On the fireplace mantel stood a silver picture frame. Inside it was a photograph of himself, not as an adult, as a little boy. The same striped sweater he vaguely remembered from his earliest childhood. The same small scar beside his eyebrow. The same smile. His hands began to shake. He slowly stepped closer until he was certain there was no mistake. Someone in this house had displayed a picture of him for years. But he had never met this woman before. So why would a complete stranger keep a photograph of him as a child in her most private room? Neris stood frozen in front of the fireplace until he heard footsteps approaching in the hallway. He carefully placed the silver frame back exactly where he had found it and hurried out of the sitting room before anyone saw him. The rest of the night passed in silence. Sleep never came. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that photograph again. There was no way it could have been someone who merely looked like him. He remembered that striped sweater. He remembered falling off a bicycle and getting the small scar above his eyebrow. Someone inside this house knew who he was. The next morning, breakfast was served in a bright dining room overlooking the gardens. The widow greeted him with the same gentle smile, though she seemed unusually quiet. "I hope you slept well," she asked. "I managed." She studied his face for several seconds before speaking again. "You've changed so much." Neris looked up. "I'm sorry." She blinked as though she had accidentally revealed too much. "I mean, from your employee file. It had an old identification photograph." He wasn't convinced. As breakfast continued, she asked another unexpected question. "When you were little, did anyone ever call you Neri?" His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. His parents had never used that nickname. Very few people even knew it existed. "How do you know that name?" The widow lowered her eyes. "I must have heard it somewhere." She stood before he could ask another question. "I have some correspondence to finish." She walked away more quickly than before, leaving Neris staring after her. By late morning, he stepped outside and called his parents. His father answered immediately. "You'd better not be calling because you want to quit. I need to ask you something." "What?" "Have either of you ever met the woman who owns this estate?" Several seconds passed. Long enough that Neris checked whether the call had disconnected. Finally, his mother spoke from somewhere nearby. "Why would you ask that? Just answer me." His father's voice returned, sharper than before. "It doesn't matter." "It does matter." "No, it doesn't. You're there to work, not to investigate people's lives." Neris tightened his grip on the phone. "She asked me questions about my childhood." "So what?" "And she knew a nickname from when I was little." Silence. Then his father's tone changed completely. "You stay out of whatever stories that old woman tells you." "I never said she told me anything." "Enough," his father shouted. "Do your job, collect your paycheck, stop asking questions." The line went dead. Neris slowly lowered the phone. That conversation had answered far more than it intended to. His parents hadn't sounded confused. They had sounded afraid. Over the next several hours, he noticed details he had ignored before. While dusting a hallway bookshelf, he found several old family photo albums. Entire pages had been carefully removed. Not torn by accident. Cut cleanly from the bindings. Only empty corners remained where photographs had once been. Later, while organizing a study, he noticed a beautifully carved wooden cabinet tucked behind a desk. It was locked, unlike every other cabinet in the house. When he casually asked one of the maids what was kept inside, she immediately looked uncomfortable. "I've never seen it opened." "Doesn't anyone have a key?" "The mistress does." "And what's inside?" She hesitated. "I don't know." But her expression suggested otherwise. That evening, as the staff gathered for dinner, conversation flowed easily until one gardener mentioned how long the widow had lived alone. The room instantly became quiet. No one continued the topic. No one even looked toward Neris. The silence felt practiced, as though everyone had agreed years ago that certain subjects were never discussed. After dinner, Neris found the widow standing alone in the conservatory, watering orchids beneath the fading evening light. He finally asked the question that had been haunting him. "Have we met before?" She stopped watering the flowers. "No." "Then why do you keep looking at me like you recognize me?" She took a slow breath but didn't answer. He stepped closer. "And why did you know my childhood nickname?" Her hands trembled around the watering can. For several long moments, she seemed caught between speaking and remaining silent. Finally, she set the can down. There are truths that cannot be spoken until the right time. Neris frowned. "What does that even mean?" She looked directly into his eyes for the first time since he had arrived. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, Your parents never expected you to find that photograph. The words echoed through Neris's mind long after the widow walked away. He didn't chase after her. Instead, he stood alone in the conservatory, trying to make sense of what she had just admitted. She hadn't denied the photograph. She hadn't pretended it was someone else. She had spoken as though his parents already knew it existed. By the next morning, he decided he couldn't keep wondering in silence. He found the estate manager reviewing schedules in the front office. "I need to ask you something," Neris said. The manager looked up. "Go ahead." "How long has that photograph been on the fireplace in the private sitting room?" The manager's expression changed immediately. "You've seen it." "Yes." For a long moment, neither man spoke. Finally, the manager sighed. "I wondered when this day would come." Within the hour, several longtime employees had quietly gathered in the library. None of them looked surprised that the subject had finally surfaced. An elderly housekeeper folded her hands. "That photograph has been there for as long as I've worked here." "Who is the little boy?" Neris asked. She looked toward the manager before answering. "We were told never to discuss it." "By who?" "By Madam." Another employee nodded. She never explained why. She only said the picture was precious and that no one was ever to remove it. Neris looked from one face to another. "So all of you knew she kept a photograph of me?" "We knew she kept the photograph," the manager corrected gently. "We never knew who the child was." The room filled with uneasy silence. An older groundskeeper finally cleared his throat. "There was always gossip." "What kind of gossip?" "Some thought the boy had been taken away from her. Others believed she had lost a grandchild. No one ever knew the truth." Before anyone could continue, one of the senior housekeepers quietly stepped forward. "I have something you should see." She disappeared into a storage office and returned carrying a worn envelope. "I've kept these because I never believed the whole story." Inside were faded newspaper clippings from nearly 3 decades earlier. Neris carefully unfolded the first article. Its headline mentioned a fatal highway accident involving a young married couple. The second article described a custody dispute that followed the tragedy. His breathing slowed. Near the bottom of the page, he recognized 2 names. His parents. The article didn't explain their role in detail, but it confirmed they had been involved in legal proceedings connected to the child left behind after the accident. His hands trembled as he turned to the next clipping. Most of the article had faded with time. Only scattered sentences remained readable. "A family disagreement." "A guardianship hearing." "Court declines further comment." It wasn't enough to explain everything, but it was enough to prove one thing. His parents had never told him the whole story. "I need answers," Neris said. The manager nodded. "You deserve them." Neris pulled out his phone and dialed home. This time he placed the call on speaker. Several staff members remained in the room without saying a word. His father answered. "What now?" "I found newspaper articles." Silence. "They mention you after a custody case." His mother's voice suddenly joined the call. "Who gave those to you?" "So it's true." "You don't know what you're talking about," his father snapped. "Then explain it." "You need to leave that house immediately." "Why?" "Because that woman is trying to manipulate you." The estate staff exchanged uneasy glances. "What relationship did you have with her?" Neris asked. "You listen to me," his father shouted. "Pack your things and come home." "You still haven't answered my question." "You don't need answers." "I think I do." His father's breathing grew heavier. "Everything she's telling you is a lie." "She hasn't told me anything." The room went completely still. His father had assumed the widow was already revealing secrets. Instead of denying any connection, he had exposed his own fear. Without another word, his mother ended the call. The silence afterward felt heavier than the conversation itself. The estate manager slowly folded the newspaper clippings. "They're frightened," he said quietly. "Why?" Before anyone could answer, the widow entered the library carrying a small brass key. She walked to the carved cabinet Neris had noticed the previous day. No one spoke. The lock clicked open. She reached inside with trembling hands and removed a thick legal file wrapped in a faded ribbon. Without opening it herself, she placed it directly in front of Neris. "This has waited long enough." Neris stared at the thick legal file resting on the library table. The faded ribbon looked as though it had not been untied in years. The widow stepped back. "I believe these belong in your hands now." His fingers hesitated before pulling the ribbon free. Inside were neatly organized documents, each protected in clear sleeves. The first page was a certified copy of his birth record. He immediately recognized his own name. But beneath it were two names he had never seen before. "They're not," he whispered. The widow lowered her head. "No." Neris slowly turned another page. There were court filings stamped with official seals, copies of guardianship petitions, and photographs of a smiling young couple holding a toddler who looked unmistakably like him. Every document seemed to connect another piece of a puzzle he had never known existed. He unfolded a bundle of letters tied together with string. Each envelope was addressed to him. None had ever been opened. The postmark stretched across years of his childhood. He looked up. "Why didn't I ever get these?" The widow closed her eyes. "I sent every one of them." Before she could say more, tires crunched loudly across the gravel driveway outside. The estate manager looked through the front window. "They're here." Neris's stomach tightened. Moments later, the front doors burst open. His father strode into the foyer with his mother close behind. "There you are," his father barked. He pointed toward the entrance. "Get your things, we're leaving." Neris remained seated. "I'm not going anywhere until I know what's in these files." His father stepped toward the table. "You don't need those." The widow moved between them. "He has every right to read them." "You stay out of this," his mother snapped. "You've interfered enough." The raised voices drew several members of the household staff into the hallway. No one attempted to interrupt. Everyone watched. His father jabbed a finger toward the widow. "He's our son." The widow answered calmly. "Then let him read the truth." "There is no truth here," his father shot back. "Only old lies." Neris looked from one side to the other. "Then explain these birth records." His parents exchanged a quick glance but said nothing. Before either of them could speak again, another vehicle pulled into the drive. The estate manager opened the door. An elderly man carrying a leather briefcase entered the house. His silver hair was neatly combed, and he walked with measured confidence. The widow greeted him quietly. "Thank you for coming." He nodded. "I came as soon as I received your message." The man turned to Neris. "My name is Harold Bennett." He extended a hand. "I served as the family attorney during the original guardianship proceedings." Neris shook it cautiously. "You know what's in these files?" "I do." Harold placed his briefcase on the table and carefully removed several additional folders. "I witnessed the hearings myself." His father immediately stepped forward. "This meeting is over." "It is not," Harold replied evenly. "You have no authority here." His mother's voice rose. "Those records are private." "They concern the man standing in front of us," Harold answered. "He has every legal right to review them." Neris returned to the file. Every page connected another clue. The newspaper articles. The missing album pages. The childhood nickname. The photograph above the fireplace. Nothing felt random anymore. Everything pointed toward one hidden story. Near the bottom of the stack rested a final sealed envelope. Unlike the others, it carried an official court seal. Harold rested his hand lightly on it. That document answers the question you've been asking since you arrived. Before Neris could reach for it, his father lunged across the table, trying to snatch the file away. The estate manager caught his arm. The folders scattered across the polished wood. "No," his father shouted. Harold stepped between them, his voice calm but unmistakably firm. "It's time he learns who raised him, and who stole him from his family." Harold carefully broke the court seal and removed the final document. He didn't hand it to the widow. He placed it directly in front of Neris. "You should read it yourself." The room was silent, except for the sound of paper unfolding. The first page confirmed the names on the birth certificate. The young couple in the photographs were his biological parents. The next pages documented the accident that had taken both of their lives when Neris was only a small child. He turned another page. A petition filed by his biological grandmother requested permanent custody after their deaths. Another filing appeared beneath it. His parents' names, not as his mother and father, as relatives requesting temporary guardianship while the estate and custody matters were settled. Neris's hands began to shake. He continued reading. Court correspondence showed that temporary guardianship had become permanent after false statements and withheld information prevented his grandmother from maintaining contact. Copies of returned letters, denied visitation requests, and official notices painted the same picture over and over. His grandmother had never disappeared. She had never abandoned him. She had spent years trying to reach him. The letters beside him suddenly meant everything. "They told me," Neris whispered, struggling to finish the sentence. "They told me everyone on my father's side wanted nothing to do with me." His grandmother quietly nodded, tears running down her face. "I searched for you for years. Every birthday I wrote another letter. Every Christmas I hoped one would finally reach you." She gently touched the stack of unopened envelopes. They all came back. Neris opened one at random. Inside was a birthday card written in careful handwriting. "My dear Neri, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I want you to know that I have never stopped loving you. I will keep trying until the day I can see you again. Love always. Grandma." His vision blurred. He looked toward the people he had called Mom and Dad for his entire life. His father refused to meet his eyes. His mother stared at the floor. "You knew," Neris said. Neither answered. "You let me believe I was unwanted." His father finally spoke. "We did what we thought was best." "For who?" There was no response. Harold opened another folder. "There is more." He spread several financial records across the table. These documents show that assistance intended for Neris's care continued for years after the guardianship changed. The funds were never used for their intended purpose. The estate manager slowly looked toward Neris's parents. His father took a step backward. His mother covered her mouth. Harold continued. "Based on these records and the court file, I have already contacted the appropriate authorities. The guardianship proceedings will be reviewed, and the financial records will be investigated." No one argued. There was nothing left to deny. The truth was sitting on the table for everyone to see. His grandmother finally walked toward Neris. "I never wanted revenge," she said quietly. "I only wanted the chance to tell you that you were loved." For a long moment Neris couldn't speak. Then he stepped forward and embraced her. She cried openly against his shoulder. So did he. Years of confusion, anger, and unanswered questions seemed to collapse into that single moment. Across the room, his parents stood completely alone. The people who had watched them demand control only minutes earlier now looked at them with disbelief. Within weeks, the reopened case became known throughout the extended family. Relatives who had believed the old story learned what had actually happened. Relationships that had lasted decades fell apart almost overnight. The investigation into the guardianship and financial records moved forward, and his parents faced civil claims along with the possibility of criminal charges related to the misuse of funds. The control they had exercised over Neris for most of his life was gone. Neris made a decision of his own. He remained at the estate, not as an employee, as family. His grandmother updated her estate plans to recognize him as her grandson, explaining that it was never about wealth. It was about restoring the place in the family that had been taken from him. Over the following months, cousins, aunts, and uncles he had never known visited the manor. Old photo albums were brought out. This time, none of the pages were missing. For the first time in his life, Neris heard stories about his biological parents from people who had actually loved them. He laughed at memories he had never known existed. He mourned the years he had lost. And slowly he began building new ones. One quiet evening, he walked into the private sitting room where everything had begun. The childhood photograph still rested on the fireplace. He picked it up gently. Beside it, he placed a newly framed photograph taken only days earlier. It showed him standing beside his grandmother in the same room, both of them smiling. He looked at the two photographs for a long moment. One captured the family that had been stolen. The other captured the family that had finally been found. Standing before the same fireplace where the photograph first changed everything, Neris replaced the old picture with a new family portrait, proof that the truth hidden for decades could no longer be taken away.